Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Will Barkley. Will Barkley represents the 124th Assembly District in New York State. That's an Assembly District that includes the counties of Oswego and Onondaga. And we want to thank you folks all across that part of New York State for joining us for our program today. Will Barkley, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Mike, good to be here. How are you?
Pretty good. It's been crazy here. This budget process is moving right along. You know, so many years recently it's been slowed down. You kind of wonder, are we ever going to have a budget? And of course, we've had those discussions for so many years about late state budgets. But the governor came in, this new governor, with a newly reconfigured legislature, and he says, here's my budget proposal. The legislature receives it, holds its hearings, and already each house of the legislature, the Assembly's passed a version of its budget, the Senate's done the same thing, so now there's 3 different versions, and the negotiations are really pretty darn serious right now.
Well, I think a couple things are pushing that way. First, I think New Yorkers have had it with state government, and obviously as public servants, we feel what our constituency is speaking out about, and people are concerned and saying state government's not addressing the problems we have in New York State. We certainly feel that, so I think there's some motivation from there. Second reason, I think, is because we don't have any more money, Mike. The state is broke. We have a $10 billion shortfall. So even though these are hard decisions that had to be made, I think, fortunately, for the first time, maybe both sides of the aisle recognize that we have to get spending under control. And as long as that macro level thinking goes on, we can, work out and negotiate the details of how that's going to work with the cuts. So those are the 2 reasons why I think, things are pretty moving in the right direction. The third reason I should mention is really how the political winds have shifted since Patterson did his budget last year, where he put all his budget bills into the extender bills, and if the legislature didn't accept his budget bills, we would have shut down government. That changed the dynamics down here substantially, and obviously Cuomo's said the same thing. He said, this is the time to negotiate. We'll go to April 1st. If the legislature and I can't reach an agreement by April 1st, well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to put my budget in the extender bills, and then the legislature will have the choice of either voting through that budget or shutting down state government. So it is a little bit different in dynamics, but I think those 3 reasons are really why things are on schedule.
But I suppose we should say, but it's not like it's all been perfect and everybody is driven in the same direction, because there have been some bumps and potholes along the way. A lot of potholes out there right now, folks. You know it as well as I do. The same thing is true here in the budget negotiations. What we've seen as each of the houses, the Assembly and the Senate, have passed their budgets, we've seen some differences with the governor. The governor continues to talk a very tough game about spending cuts and cuts in state aid to school districts and cuts to Medicaid and cuts in mandates and cut. But when the Assembly passed its budget, let's talk about that a little bit today, because you took part in that vote and witnessed that debate. There were new taxes in there, something the governor said he would have no part of, for example, the millionaire's tax.
Yeah, well, not surprisingly. I mean, that's traditionally what the Assembly majority has always done. When we get into these difficult economic times, the first thing they want to do is tax. Although I will give them credit, they did obviously add in some spending that the governor, had cut, but at the same time, they still overall are cutting spending in New York State, which I think is probably the first time I've been down here in their proposed budget where they actually have spending cuts in their proposed budget. But getting back to the tax, I mean, this is a mentality, unfortunately, we fight constantly in the state legislature. Whenever we get in a pickle, the majority Democrats want to raise taxes, and they'll disguise it as every which way. They call this one, I call it the success tax, but they'll call it the millionaire's tax, even though initially it was proposed at anyone earning more than $200,000 a year. But putting that all aside, we cannot tax our way out of this problem. We've been doing that for too long in New York State. If it's not the millionaire's tax, it's going to be a tax on snowmobile licenses. It's going to be taxes on insurance. It's going to be taxes on energy. It's going to be taxes on, workers' comp. You name it. Health care taxes on hospitals. It seems incredible. There's nothing out there that's sacred that's not taxed, by the majority. So it was unfortunate they included this millionaire's tax, so-called millionaire's tax, or success tax, as I like to call it. But hopefully, the governor said he's not going to support that going forward. The majority in the Senate says they're not going to support it. So hopefully, this is maybe just some posturing to their constituency, and will not be, finalized in the final budget that we do in April.
You mentioned health care tax. There was even talk during the debate in the Assembly as that budget bill passed about taxing babies, newborns.
Right.
You know, and somebody said, well, if you're going to tax newborns, you know, and you've got the estate tax, you're really taxing New Yorkers from start to finish.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? The only thing, I don't know if we're taxing the air, but we probably will do that shortly.
As soon as we figure out a way, we should
Right.
quiet,
Shouldn't give
but
them any
don't give
ideas.
anybody any ideas, right?
But overall, even that, and let's put it in perspective, this has been at least, I mean, obviously I voted against the Assembly majority's budget for a number of the tax increases they have. I don't think maybe they go far enough in some of the spending cuts, but let's just put it in perspective. The good news is they're on the right track. Again, on the macro level, we can, you know, have problems with various ways things are being spent and where places are being spent and priorities, but on the overall level, I think there's a recognition by both houses and certainly the governor that spending needs to be cut in New York. We need to get a responsible budget. We need to get it done on time. So I'm optimistic that hopefully we can get that done.
So, you know, what's good about that is, from where I sit, is that means the officials that are elected as representatives of the people of New York State have remembered now, 4, 5, 6 months later, since the November 2010 elections, that message.
Right.
You talked about it yourself. The political winds are blowing differently now than they have been the past 10, 20 years here in Albany.
Absolutely, and let's face it, because of those elections, the dynamics have changed down here in Albany also. I mean, you would never think you'd have a Democratic governor giving such a fiscally conservative message than he is this year. Unfortunately, before we had a different party in control of the Senate as a result of having the Senate flip. That's changed the dynamics. In our House, we've obviously gained a lot more members in our side of the aisle, which I think also has put pressure. So it's not only is a political wind continuing to blow that I think that was going on in November, but the results of what happened in November, I think, are having some substantial effects here in Albany also.
So the way the process is right now, the governor, as I mentioned earlier on, had given his budget proposal to the legislature. The Assembly now has passed what it thinks it would like. The majority in the Assembly for a budget. The Senate majority has done the same thing. So there's now 3 budgets on the table, and it's time for the negotiating to get serious. And so in the legislature, they are holding what are known as joint budget conference committees, where Assembly members, senators meet at tables to discuss about particular subject areas or issue areas in the budget. You are serving on one of those, the Higher Education Budget Sub-Conference Committee.
Conference committee, that's a mouthful, I know.
It is, there's a lot going on there. But let's talk a little bit about
let's go
those.
back. This is what we passed, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago in law to try to make the budget process more transparent, open to rank and file members, and obviously, as a result, end up with a better budget process. Over the last 2 years, we got away from it. For whatever reason, the legislative leaders decided not to impanel these joint conference committees, and you see as a result what happened. We had terrible budgets the last couple of years. So I'm pleased, not only does things seem to be moving forward, but this year they went back to this joint conference committee process, which essentially breaks out different areas in the budget to both the Senate and Assembly conferees that meet. We've met once. I'm on the Higher Ed Joint Conference Committee, and try to hack out the details of these specific budget pieces. The nice thing about these things, they're open to the public. You know how much money is involved here. It's a matter of trying to divvy up where the money goes and set priorities of how the state wants to spend money. So I'm very heartened. The last time we had these, I think might have been the last time or the only time I voted for the state budget, because I felt like, one, I had a voice in the process, and frankly, I thought the final product was much better than what we'd been doing either before that or afterwards when we didn't do these joint conference committees.
So after the first one of those meetings that your group held, did you still get the sense that that's the way the discussion's going, that it's more about spending reductions, living within means, rather than where are we going to come up with more money to spend, and in order to do everything that everybody wants to get done?
Without a doubt. I mean, without a doubt. Again, I think any new taxes are off the table just because the Senate and the governor said that. So as a result, even though the majority in the Assembly would like to do that, it's not going to happen. So I think that hopefully they understand that politically. So really, the first joint conference committee I did with Higher Ed, we really were just talking about where everybody agreed, because there are parts of the budget that everybody agrees on, the governor, Senate, and the Assembly. Today we have another joint conference committee. I suspect we'll try to start tackling the issues where there is disagreement.
One of the things that I'm hearing as I'm listening to some of the higher education discussion is that there seems to be a parallel with the higher educational institutions, namely SUNY, chief among them as far as the relationship with New York State government goes, and school districts and local governments, they want an autonomy. They want less direction from Albany as to what they have to do by way of tuition or programs, I'll use the word mandates.
Right. Well, without a doubt. I mean, it's a little different for what SUNY's looking for versus what the local school districts are. I mean, the local school districts are stuck with their, what they're mandated down by 70 or 80%. I think they're mandated by the state ed department of what they either have to teach or what, courses they have to cover, what kind of services they have to provide, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a big push, obviously, by them to get under this mandate relief, particularly if we end up doing a property tax cap, which, interestingly enough, you heard the governor say last week that he's thinking about putting the property tax cap back in the budget, which I think a lot of people thought that was kind of being pushed off, and maybe we'll take care of it after the budget's passed. So I thought that was really interesting, and maybe that there's some trading going on. The speaker wants to put in rent control regulations back in that budget too. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But certainly, mandate relief from the school districts, particularly where I am, is critical if we're going to cap their what much they can levy or raise in tax levies.
Well, it's like I said, there seems to be a parallel in that everybody's kind of looking to Albany saying, enough already.
Right.
You've been telling us for too long how to do what it is we do. You send down the mandates to us, but you don't send the money with it. That's what the school districts are saying.
Right.
And even the higher education institutions are saying, you tell us what we can charge for tuition and who, how many students, that sort of thing.
Well, this will show you how difficult some of these issues get, because obviously people have different opinions on it, but some stuff that seems so commonsensical. The one for higher ed is how they can procure whatever they have to do. The hospitals obviously have to procure, the teaching hospitals need medical equipment, but in order to get that, they have to jump through so many different hurdles through the SUNY system. It really slows down the process. So if there's some new medical tool that they have out, or even an old one, say an MRI or something, they have to go through so much red tape in order to get that. Usually by the time they can get approval for it, the purpose of the machine or whatever it is bypassed the teaching hospitals. So, I mean, there's some kind of crazy systems in place that if we could just, get away from the politics of the situation and really look at a common sense approach, you can make, the whole system much better. And this is just procurement. I mean, it seems like a pretty at least to me, seems like a relatively non-controversial issue. But boy, once you start getting into tuition or something, it just goes right off the table.
Like it's
controversy.
A whole different discussion to be had for sure. Do you feel, even with the different political winds blowing and that you've got new players, new governors, so many new legislators involved, that there's really a chance that this progress can be moving as efficiently as it is, that maybe there will be an April 1st budget? Do you think that's a possibility?
I think there will be an April 1st budget, and really it's because of the three reasons I outlined in the beginning of the program. But the big hammer is the fact that if there isn't, I mean, this is a time for the legislature to negotiate, because if we don't, we're going to end up with the governor's budget, and it would be what he wants, or we have the choice of shutting down government. I can tell you, I don't think that serves anybody's purpose, or anybody wants to do that. So I think that is the ultimate hammer that we have that's hopefully going to get one done by April 1st.
Yeah, a hammer that the governor's holding. The pendulum really seems to have swung in favor of a strong governor right now in New York State, and it looks as if the fellow who's holding that office right now understands that. He gets that.
I guess so. He does, doesn't he?
Yeah, it seems to be. His bully pulpit is very much in bully mode right now, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all works out. Yeah. We will, in our next program, maybe be very close to that. In fact, if the calendar is right, well, the budget will be done